Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going, well, deep into the world of Greek mythology.
Always a good place to be.
Always. But specifically, we're talking about Hades.
Ah,
And I know
yes.
what you're thinking, oh, the gloomy underworld guy, right? But
Uh,
we're going way beyond that.
Much deeper.
We've got basically a stack of Wikipedia articles here,
Okay.
and we're going to see Hades not just as, the typical bad guy, but as this really complex figure in Greek myth.
Absolutely. And I think what's always kind of fascinating me about Hades is how much he is misunderstood.
Yeah,
You know, I think it's very easy to get caught up in that simple image, but, he's a king.
Mm.
He's a ruler of a realm that has its own um, intricacies and maybe even, dare I say, a unique kind of beauty.
Okay, you've already got me intrigued. And speaking of intrigue, even his name is a bit of a mystery, right? Like, the ancient Greeks were almost afraid to say his name out loud.
Yeah.
What's that about?
I think it really underscores the power that they attributed to him. They believed that uttering his name could attract his attention, which, not a good thing. So they had all of these kind of nicknames and euphemisms,
Yeah.
like Pluton, for example,
Ooh,
meaning the wealthy one.
wait, the wealthy one?
Yeah.
That's a pretty big jump from, like, gloomy god of the dead, right?
Yeah. But I think it points to kind of this other side of Hades, his association with the riches of the earth.
Oh,
Like precious metals, fertile crops. All of these things come from beneath the ground, which is, of course, his domain. So it's a reminder that the underworld isn't just about death, but also about potential and abundance, maybe even rebirth.
yeah, like that whole cycle of life and death thing. But it's also interesting, this fear of saying a powerful name. It's not just a Greek thing, right?
Oh,
It
absolutely.
makes me think of, in the Jewish tradition, avoiding Yahweh's name, or even like pop culture, like Voldemort.
Right.
Like, you don't say his name.
Exactly. I think it's a recurring theme across so many cultures.
Mm.
This idea that language can hold power. Names themselves can contain a kind of essence. It speaks to this human desire to control forces beyond our understanding, especially those we fear.
For sure. Okay, so let's get into, like, Hades' origin story. So just to recap, swallowed by his dad, Cronus,
Hmm.
freed by Zeus, battles Titans, the whole shebang. Typical Greek god family drama, right?
Right. Yeah.
But then comes this division of the cosmos, and this is where things get interesting. Zeus gets the sky, Poseidon gets the sea, and Hades gets, well, he gets the underworld. And I've always kind of seen that as like a raw deal. I don't know, spending eternity with the dead doesn't sound like a prize.
Well, I can see why you'd think that.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember, first of all, that Hades is still a king.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He's got power. He's got a kingdom to rule.
Yeah.
And, it's made very clear in a lot of the texts, even going back to Homer, that he holds an equal share of the universe. So it wasn't seen so much as a punishment, but more of a, like a vital role in maintaining cosmic order.
Okay, so already we're kind of breaking down the stereotype of Hades as this, like, grumpy, passive figure just hanging out in the dark.
Totally.
He's got a job to do.
Absolutely. He's got responsibilities and much more agency, I think, than we initially think. And another misconception I think we need to clear up right away. Hades is not the Grim Reaper.
Right, yeah.
That's Thanatos,
Yeah.
the personification of death.
Mm-hmm.
Hades is more like, I guess you could say, the administrator of the underworld. He's the one who's focused on maintaining order, making sure the souls that enter his realm stay put. In fact, he very rarely leaves his domain, which I think kind of speaks to his dedication to his role.
Gotcha. All right, so if we're talking Hades, we have to talk about Persephone.
Of course.
This myth is, like, at the heart of his story.
Yeah.
And it's, well, let's just say complicated.
Complicated for sure.
So just to set it up, Hades abducts Persephone and takes her to the underworld. Her mom, Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, she is understandably furious and unleashes this worldwide famine. Dark stuff. But this myth has always felt, I don't know, just like layered to me.
Yeah, it really is, because it touches on, not just this relationship between life and death, but also like loss and grief and that cyclical nature of the seasons. And it's interesting because even the sources, they kind of present contrasting views on their relationship.
Yeah.
Like, was it genuine love or was it a forced abduction? It seems like there's elements of both woven into the story.
Totally. Like, on one hand, you've got Zeus giving his approval, but on the other, Persephone's clearly taken against her will initially. And then there's the whole pomegranate seed thing, which is like such a small detail, but such huge implications.
Exactly. Those pomegranate seeds, they're so symbolic, right? By eating just a few, Persephone's bound to the underworld for a portion of every year. And this is where the myth, I think, gets even more fascinating because it ties into the changing seasons.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So winter becomes this reflection of Demeter's grief
Yeah.
and Persephone's absence. And, some scholars even interpret her choice to eat the seeds as an acceptance of her role, which kind of highlights this balance between, those light and dark aspects of life.
Wow, that's so much deeper than like just explaining why winter exists. Like this myth is tapping into something way more fundamental about the human experience.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we know the underworld wasn't exactly a tourist destination.
Right.
But there were a few brave souls, or maybe foolish ones, who made the trip down.
A few.
And sometimes even managed to come back out. You've got, like, Orpheus desperately trying to rescue his beloved Eurydice, using music to charm even Hades. Then you've got Theseus and Persephone, this pair of ambitious heroes with this not-so-brilliant plan to kidnap Helen and woo Persephone.
Ah, yes, the classic tale of hubris.
Right.
They learn the hard way that you don't mess with the gods, especially in their own realm, ending up trapped by snakes at a feast hosted by the god of the underworld. That's got a sting.
Yeah, probably not on the itinerary.
Probably not.
But their story really underscores, like, the danger of overstepping boundaries.
Yeah, for sure.
And those consequences of challenging divine power. It's such a theme in Greek myths, right?
Absolutely. This sense of order, a cosmic hierarchy that even the most powerful heroes had to respect. And speaking of consequences, we can't forget about Sisyphus,
Right.
the ultimate trickster.
Yeah.
He cheated death, not once, but twice.
Oh, yeah. He was a real piece of work.
Yeah, his eternal punishment, pushing that boulder uphill only to have it roll back down,
Right.
has become this metaphor for futility.
It's such a powerful image, right?
Yeah.
This endless struggle against the inevitable.
Exactly.
He kind of becomes this cautionary tale about trying to outsmart fate.
Right.
It's interesting how the Greeks use these myths to explore those kind of like deep, profound ideas.
Totally. They weren't just stories for entertainment. They were vehicles for philosophical exploration, moral exploration. They're grappling with these big questions about, existence and justice, the human condition. And while Sisyphus kind of represents the consequences of defying fate, another hero, Heracles, encounters Hades in a very different context.
Oh, yeah.
His 12th labor was to capture Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog of the underworld.
Right. And this is where we see kind of a more active, maybe even cooperative side to Hades.
Yeah, totally.
Right. He sets conditions for Heracles, allowing him to take Cerberus, but only if he does so without harming him.
Exactly. And it challenges that simplistic notion of Hades as purely malevolent. He's a god with responsibilities, he's bound by certain rules, and even capable, it seems, of showing a degree of flexibility and even fairness. It's a reminder that even within the underworld, there's this sense of order, a sense of justice.
So it's not just like a free-for-all down there.
Right, exactly.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about how Hades was depicted in art. I'm guessing it wasn't exactly like a popular subject for cheerful murals.
Not so much.
Right. On pottery.
You're right, he's actually depicted less often than other Greek gods, likely because of that fear that he inspired. And when he is shown, it's often in this very stately, imposing manner. Maybe holding his key to the underworld, or a scepter, or his badent.
Makes sense. You don't want to take too many artistic liberties.
Right.
When you're dealing with the god of the dead. But didn't his image kind of evolve over time? Because I feel like I've seen some more benevolent-looking representations of him, especially in Roman art.
Ah, yes. You're thinking of Pluto, his Roman counterpart.
Okay.
The Romans viewed Pluto as a much more benevolent figure, often depicted with a cornucopia, which is that symbol of abundance and prosperity.
Oh, interesting. So they really leaned into that whole wealthy one aspect of his name.
Exactly.
What do you think caused that shift?
Well, it probably reflects their own kind of emphasis on prosperity and the bounty of the earth. They saw Pluto as a god who provided those riches, rather than just being this ruler of the dead. It's a really interesting example of how different cultures interpret the same deity in different ways.
Yeah.
Which highlights, this kind of fluidity of myth.
Right.
and its ability to adapt to evolving cultural values.
It reminds us that there's always more to discover, even with these figures that we think we know so well.
Absolutely.
Speaking of discoveries, let's talk about the underworld itself. It's not just some like homogeneous fiery hell, right?
Right.
The ancient Greeks had this much more kind of nuanced view of the afterlife.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It was more like this complex society with different regions and levels of existence.
Exactly. And the underworld was divided into these distinct regions,
Yeah.
each with its own purpose, its own character. You got Elysium, paradise reserved for the most virtuous souls, the Asphodel Meadows, which is this kind of neutral zone where most souls resided, and of course Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, where the wicked were punished. So, this wasn't just about good versus evil, but it was a reflection of one's actions in life
Okay.
with various levels of, reward and punishment.
So it's starting to sound less like this like one-size-fits-all afterlife and more like this complex system with
Exactly.
its own rules and structure.
Right. And it's important to remember that these regions weren't just random locations. They were imbued with symbolic meaning. Take, for example, the rivers,
Oh, yeah.
like the Styx, which forms the boundary between the world of the living and the dead,
Yeah.
or Lethe, the river of forgetfulness.
Yeah, these rivers, they add so much depth to the underworld. Like, it makes it more than just this physical location. It
Right.
becomes like a reflection of like the human psyche, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
The Styx represents like boundaries, transitions, and Lethe is all about memory, oblivion,
Right.
these crucial elements of the human experience.
Exactly.
Okay, I've been waiting for this one. Let's talk about the connection between Hades and Dionysus.
Oh, yes.
Wait, Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy.
Right.
What does he have to do with the god of the underworld?
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because there's evidence linking Hades to Dionysus in a number of ways. They share certain epithets, there are symbolic connections relating to death and rebirth, and they're even linked through the Orphic mysteries.
Hold on, for those of us who aren't like ancient Greek scholars, can you kind of break down what the Orphic mysteries were?
Sure. The Orphic mysteries were this mystical religious tradition in ancient Greece, and they centered around the figure of Orpheus
Okay.
and offered this unique perspective on the afterlife and the relationship between the living and the dead. It's within this context that we see these connections between Hades and Dionysus emerge.
So it's like there's this whole other dimension to Hades, a connection to like the ecstatic, the transformative, like
Right.
something beyond just the typical image of death and darkness.
Exactly.
But was this like a widely known aspect of Hades, or was it more like a secret?
That's a great question, and it's one that scholars are still debating today.
Yeah.
Was this a hidden aspect of the god? Or did it reflect a more general understanding of how deities in ancient Greece could embody multiple facets of the human experience, often overlapping and evolving in meaning? I think it really speaks to the richness and fluidity of Greek mythology and this constant interplay between the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown.
It's mind-blowing to think how much depth and complexity is just packed into these myths. We've gone from this nameless, fearsome god to a king, an administrator, and now even a figure with these potential connections to ecstasy and rebirth. It's like peeling back layers of an onion, constantly revealing these new and surprising dimensions.
Exactly. And it highlights the power of myth to transcend time and culture, to continue to challenge our assumptions and offer new perspectives on the world. These weren't just simple stories. They were reflections of how the ancient Greeks grappled with these big questions of life and death and the nature of existence itself. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It makes you think, if the god of the underworld wasn't just like this one-dimensional evil figure,
Right.
what does that tell us about how the ancient Greeks viewed death itself?
That's such a good question.
Mm.
I think it suggests that they didn't see death as simply an end
Yeah.
or the underworld as just this place of, punishment.
Right, right.
It was a realm with its own complexities and its own hierarchies, and even, you could say, its own sense of justice.
So it wasn't just like a good versus evil kind of afterlife.
Exactly. The fact that, Hades is portrayed as this complex figure, a king with responsibilities,
Yeah.
even capable, as we
Right.
saw with Heracles, of, a degree of fairness, suggests that the underworld was almost viewed as like a reflection of the living world.
Yeah, yeah.
It had its own rules, its own order, its own version of, cosmic balance.
It's like they understood that death wasn't just an absence, but like a continuation.
Right.
This transition to another state of being, and not necessarily something to be feared entirely, but just like a natural part of this cosmic cycle.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And that perspective, I think, really sets Greek mythology apart from some other belief systems that present a much more,
Black and white.
black and white, good versus evil kind of view of the afterlife.
It really makes you wonder how those different, like, cultural perspectives on death might have influenced, like, their art,
Oh, for sure.
literature, their whole worldview. It's a rabbit hole, but a fascinating one to go down.
It is, and it speaks to, I think, that power of mythology to shape our understanding of the world and our place in it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. Hades' name, his origin story, the relationship with Persephone. Those are like daring visitors to the underworld. His portrayal in art, even that connection to Dionysus.
Wild, right?
But before we, like, wrap up our deep dive, I wanted to touch on one more thing. We keep talking about the underworld, but what did that actually look like? Like, what did the ancient Greeks, like, envision when they thought about this realm?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because it's easy to get caught up in this, like, abstract idea of the underworld.
Right.
But the ancient Greeks had a very specific vision of this realm. It wasn't just this, like, dark, empty void.
Right.
It was a vast, complex landscape
Okay.
with different regions,
Yeah.
and each of them had its own unique character and purpose.
So more like a map than just a single destination.
Exactly. We already talked about some of them. Elysium, the paradise for virtuous souls, the Asphodel Meadows, that sort of neutral zone,
Right.
and of course Tartarus, pit of punishment.
Right.
But it's worth, I think, emphasizing how vividly the Greeks imagined these places. They had meadows and forests and rivers, even cities within the underworld.
So it was almost like a mirror image of the living world, just like underground.
In a way, yeah. It
Yeah.
reflects this idea that, death wasn't this complete separation from life,
Yeah.
but rather this transition to another realm that still had its own structures, its own beauty, and even its own, challenges.
It's making me rethink that whole going to hell concept.
Right.
It sounds like there was so much more nuance to the Greek understanding of the afterlife.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that nuance is what makes exploring these myths so rewarding.
Yeah.
Because they really challenge our assumptions.
Yeah.
And they offer us a glimpse into this worldview that's both familiar
Yeah.
and strikingly different from our own.
Okay, so, like, big picture, what does this all mean? What are the, like, key takeaways from our, like, deep dive into Hades and the underworld?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is just the importance of looking beyond the surface, questioning those assumptions that we have,
Yeah.
and recognizing the complexity of even, the figures that we think we know so well. Hades is a perfect example of how, digging deeper into mythology can reveal these unexpected dimensions.
Totally.
And challenge our preconceived notions.
Like, he's a reminder that there's always more to the story.
Right.
And that even the, quote, bad guys can have hidden depths.
Totally.
And even a realm as seemingly dark and forbidding as the underworld can hold beauty and complexity.
Absolutely.
Or even a sense of justice.
Exactly. And for our listener, I'd leave you with this thought. If the god of the underworld wasn't simply evil, what does that tell us about how the ancient Greeks viewed death itself? Was it something to be feared, or merely another stage in that, grand cycle of existence?
It's a question worth pondering, and maybe even a starting point for your own exploration of, this incredibly rich and fascinating world of Greek mythology.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
It's been a journey.
It has. We journeyed into the depths of the underworld, encountered gods and heroes.
And unearthed, like, a wealth of insights about this ancient Greek worldview. But, like, as we've seen today, the journey into Hades' realm, it's never truly over, right?
Whatever.
There were always more myths to uncover and, like, more interpretations and layers of meaning to kind of unpack.
It's a journey that really invites us to, question our assumptions, embrace the complexity, and appreciate the power of these ancient stories.
I love that. So for our listener, if they're feeling inspired to kind of delve deeper into, like, the world of Hades and the underworld,
Right.
where would you suggest they start? Like, are there any specific resources, books, even other myths you'd recommend checking out?
Oh, there are so many. If you're looking for a classic retelling of these myths, I always recommend Edith Hamilton's Mythology.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great introduction to the major Greek myths, including those surrounding Hades and the underworld.
Yeah, that's a classic for a reason. I remember reading that one in high school.
Right.
It's so accessible, even for someone who's, just starting out.
Exactly. And if you're looking for, like, a more contemporary take, Stephen Fry's Mythos is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. I've heard great things about that one.
It's witty, it's engaging, and it really brings this fresh perspective to these ancient tales.
That's on my reading list.
Definitely. And for those who want to go like really deep into the symbolism and interpretations, Carl Kearney's The Gods of the Greeks is a must-read.
Oh, okay.
It explores the psychological and spiritual dimensions of Greek mythology, so it's great if you want a more like in-depth understanding.
Awesome. So we've got options for everybody, from the casual reader to the.
Mythology buff.
Yeah, exactly.
The important thing is just to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep letting these myths spark your imagination and challenge those perspectives.
I love that. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Hades.
Yeah.
We've journeyed through the depths of Greek mythology, debunked some common misconceptions, and uncovered a wealth of insights about this complex and often misunderstood god. And in doing so, I think we've hopefully challenged our own assumptions about the nature of death, the power of myth, and this enduring legacy of these ancient stories.
Yeah, these stories that continue to resonate with us thousands of years later.
So to our listener, as you continue your own explorations, just remember that the underworld, much like the world of myth itself, is a place of endless discovery.
It really is.
There are always more layers to uncover, more connections to make, and more meaning to find.
And who knows, maybe you'll even discover this new appreciation for the god who rules over it all, the king of the underworld, Hades.
Until next time, happy exploring.
Tell us what you think about this episode. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.